Adrian Moretti slammed a translator's laptop against the marble wall and watched it shatter into 100 pieces. "You cost me $400 million in one sentence," he said, his voice low and terrifying. The man on his knees begged. Adrian did not blink. Somewhere across that same room, a maid holding a tray of glasses understood exactly what had gone wrong, and she said nothing. Because nobody ever asked the maid. Nobody ever saw her at all. If you love a story where the person everyone ignored becomes the one who changes everything, subscribe right now, stay with me until the very end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The mansion on the north end of the city had 40 rooms, and every one of them was afraid of the man who owned it. Adrian Moretti had built an empire out of silence and threats, out of deals whispered in 3 languages across dinner tables where the wine cost more than most people made in a year. For 20 years, nobody had beaten him. Nobody had even come close. And now, standing over the broken pieces of a laptop and the broken pieces of a man, he was losing everything. And he knew exactly why. "Get him out of here," Adrian said. 2 of his men lifted the translator off the floor and dragged him toward the door. The man was still talking, still apologizing, still swearing he had done his best. Adrian didn't look at him. He was staring at the far wall as if he could see through it, all the way to the harbor where a shipment worth $400 million had just slipped through his fingers because one word had been translated wrong. "He said he'd honor the agreement," the man cried out. "Boss, I swear he said he'd honor it." "He said he'd honor it if I proved I was still strong," Adrian said quietly. "You translated the words. You missed the meaning. And now Kozlov thinks I'm weak." The door closed. The room went still. In the corner, near the long table where the failed dinner had been served, Claire Bennett stood with a tray of untouched glasses balanced against her hip. She had been in that room the entire time. She had heard every word Kozlov said, in Russian, in the harbor dialect that the professional translator clearly did not know. And she had understood something the translator hadn't. Kozlov had not been making a demand. He had been issuing a challenge. There was a difference, and the difference had just cost Adrian Moretti a fortune. But nobody asked the maid, so the maid said nothing. Claire lowered her eyes and began collecting the glasses, one by one, the way she did every night. She was good at being invisible. She had spent 2 years perfecting it inside this house. She knew which floorboards creaked, which guards fell asleep at 3 a.m, which of Adrian's men liked their coffee strong, and which ones pretended they didn't drink at all. She knew everything about that mansion because knowing things was the only power a woman like her was allowed to have. Adrian turned around. For a moment, just a moment, his eyes passed over her. And then, like always, they passed right through her, as if she were part of the furniture. He walked out without a word. Claire let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Later that night, in the servants' hallway, where the ceilings were low and the paint was peeling, an older woman named Rosa found her wiping down the same countertop she had already wiped twice. "You've been standing there 10 minutes, Rosa said. "What's wrong with you?" "Nothing," Claire said. "That's a lie, and you're a terrible liar for someone so smart." Claire almost smiled. Rosa was the closest thing she had to a friend in that house, a woman in her 60s who had worked for the Moretti family since before Adrian took over. Rosa had seen everything. Rosa had survived everything. And Rosa was the only person in the mansion who looked at Claire and actually saw a person. "I heard something tonight," Claire said carefully. "In the meeting." Rosa's expression changed. "You were serving in the meeting?" "I was. And the man Mr. Moretti was talking to, the Russian, he wasn't saying what the translator thought he was saying." Rosa set down the towel in her hands very slowly. "Claire, listen to me. Whatever you heard in that room, you didn't hear it. Whatever you understood, you don't understand it. Do you know what happens to people in this house who know too much?" "I know." "No, you think you know. There was a man before you, a driver, good man, kind man. He overheard a phone call he shouldn't have. Nobody's seen him in 3 years. Rosa leaned in close. "You keep your head down. You clean the floors, you take your money, and you stay alive. That's the whole job. That's the only job." Claire nodded, but something in her chest was pulling in the opposite direction, and it had been pulling for a long time. She hadn't always been a maid. There had been a version of her life years ago where she stood in lecture halls and translated policy documents and dreamed of working for the State Department. Her father had been a diplomat, or something close to it, and he had dragged her across the world as a child, through Moscow and Istanbul and small harbor towns where the people spoke languages that never made it into textbooks. She had learned to hear the difference between what people said and what they meant. It was the most useful skill she had ever developed, and it was completely worthless for cleaning toilets. Then her mother got sick, and the medical bills came like a tide that never went out. And every dream Claire ever had drowned underneath them. She had taken this job because it paid 3 times what any other job would. She hadn't asked what the Moretti family did. She had known, of course. Everybody knew. But knowing and needing were 2 different things, and need had won. "I'll keep my head down," Claire said. "Good girl." But that night, lying in the narrow bed in the servants' wing, Claire couldn't sleep. She kept hearing Kozlov's voice, the exact tone he had used, the specific old phrase he had chosen. In that dialect, the words meant something like, "A lion that has lost its teeth is still called a lion, but only by the fools who haven't checked." The translator had rendered it as a compliment. It had been a threat, and Adrian Moretti, the most feared man in the city, had smiled and nodded and had no idea he was being tested. She wondered how many other deals had died the same way. She wondered how much money had bled out of this empire through a wound nobody knew how to see. And she wondered, dangerously, what would happen if someone finally said something. The next morning, the mansion was in chaos. Claire could feel it the moment she came up from the servants' quarters. The guards were tense. The phones were ringing. 2 of Adrian's lieutenants stood in the main hall arguing in hushed, furious voices, and even from across the room, Claire could tell that something had gone very wrong overnight. She caught fragments as she moved through with her cleaning cart. Kozlov had gone public. He had told the other players in the harbor network that Moretti was slipping. 2 smaller partners had already pulled out of pending deals. The word on the street was that the great Adrian Moretti had lost his edge, that his translators were incompetent, that his understanding of the international game was fading. It wasn't fading. It was being murdered, one mistranslation at a time. By noon, a new translator had arrived. He was young, expensive, and confident, and he lasted exactly 1 meeting before Adrian threw him out too. By evening, Adrian had gone through 3 interpreters in 2 days, and every single one had made things worse. Claire watched it all from the edges of rooms, from behind serving trays, from the tops of staircases where she pretended to dust. She saw a powerful man drowning and refusing to admit he couldn't swim. She saw an empire that had survived assassins and rivals and federal investigations, and it was being brought down not by a bullet, but by a language barrier. And she saw the fear. The men in that house were afraid, and afraid men made mistakes, and mistakes in this world got people killed. That night, Rosa found her again in the servants' hallway. "You've got that look," Rosa said. "What look?" "The look my sister had right before she left her husband. The look people get right before they do something that changes their whole life." Rosa crossed her arms. "Don't do it, whatever it is." "I'm not doing anything." "Claire." "I'm cleaning the floors, Rosa. That's the whole job. You told me yourself." But even as she said it, Claire knew it wasn't true anymore. Something had shifted in her. For 2 years, she had made herself small, made herself silent, made herself invisible, because that was how a woman with no power and too much debt survived. But there was a limit to how long a person could pretend to be nothing, and Claire was reaching hers. The breaking point came 4 days later. Adrian Moretti had scheduled the most important meeting of his life. A man named Victor Laurent was coming to the mansion. Laurent controlled a shipping network that stretched across 3 continents, and he was the one partner who could stabilize everything, who could quiet the rumors and restore Moretti's standing in one signature. If the deal succeeded, the empire survived. If it failed, the wolves that were already circling would move in for the kill. And Adrian had no translator he trusted. Claire heard the panic through the walls of the house all day. She heard Adrian on the phone, his voice tighter than she had ever heard it. She heard him tell someone that Laurent spoke 6 languages and switched between them mid-sentence deliberately, to confuse, to test, to control. She heard him say the last 3 translators had been useless. She heard him say, in a rare moment of something almost like fear, that he didn't know how he was going to survive this one. That evening, as she polished the silver in the dining room where the meeting would take place, one of Adrian's most senior men walked in. His name was Dominic. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, and he was the only person in the entire organization that Adrian actually listened to. Dominic didn't notice Claire. Almost nobody did. He walked to the window, pulled out his phone, and made a call. And Claire kept polishing the same fork over and over while she listened. "It's bad," Dominic said into the phone. "Worse than he's letting on. Laurent's going to eat him alive tomorrow, and he knows it. We've burned through every interpreter in the city, and they're all garbage. If this deal falls apart, Adrian's finished. And if Adrian's finished, so are we." A pause. "I don't know. I've been with this family 30 years, and I've never seen him like this. He's scared, and Adrian doesn't get scared." Dominic hung up. He stood at the window a moment longer, and then he turned to leave. And as he turned, his eyes finally landed on Claire. She froze. "How long have you been standing there?" Dominic asked. "I'm just cleaning the silver, sir," Claire said, keeping her voice flat and empty, the voice of someone who understands nothing and hears nothing. "For the meeting tomorrow." Dominic studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. Then he seemed to decide she was exactly what she looked like, which was nothing, and he walked out. Claire set down the fork. Her hands were shaking, but not from fear. She was thinking about Victor Laurent. She was thinking about a man who switched languages to control the room, who hid threats inside compliments, who tested the men across from him to see if they were worth doing business with. And she was thinking that she had spent her entire childhood listening to exactly this kind of man, and she understood them better than any translator in this city ever could. She could save the deal. She could save the empire. She could save all of them. And it would probably get her killed. Rosa's words came back to her. "Keep your head down. Take your money. Stay alive. There was a man before you, and nobody's seen him in 3 years." Claire went back to the servants' quarters that night and lay awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, arguing with herself in the dark. She thought about her mother, gone now for 8 months, and all the years Claire had spent making herself smaller and smaller until there was almost nothing left. She thought about the person she had been before the debt, before the fear, before this house. She thought about how tired she was of being invisible, of being furniture, of having a mind full of things nobody would ever let her say, and she made a decision that would change everything. The next evening, Victor Laurent arrived. He came with 4 men and an air of quiet menace, a tall, elegant European in a suit that probably cost more than the mansion's front gate. Adrian met him in the dining room, and the 2 most dangerous men Claire had ever seen sat down across from each other with a professional translator between them, a nervous woman who had been hired that morning and clearly regretted it already. Claire was assigned to serve. It was the perfect cover. A maid pouring wine, refilling glasses, moving in and out of the room like a ghost. She could hear everything, and nobody would ever suspect she understood a word. The meeting began in English, then slid into French, then into something Claire recognized immediately as a regional dialect from the southern coast of France, a rough, old fishing town accent that Laurent had almost certainly grown up speaking. The translator caught the French. She did not catch the dialect. And within 20 minutes, Claire watched the exact same disaster begin to unfold that had already cost Adrian $400 million. Laurent was testing him. He wasn't discussing the deal at all, not really. He was probing, feeling out whether Adrian was still the man his reputation claimed, whether the rumors of his decline were true. And every time Laurent slipped into the dialect to hide the real meaning of what he was saying, the translator smoothed it over into something polite and empty, and Adrian responded to the polite, empty version, and every response made him look weaker than the last. Claire could see it happening. She could see Laurent's growing certainty that the great Adrian Moretti was a paper lion. She could see the almost imperceptible signal Laurent gave to his men, the slight relaxing of his shoulders that meant he had made up his mind. He was going to walk away from this deal, and when he did, the news would spread across 3 continents by morning, and the empire would fall. The tension in the room was becoming something physical. Adrian could feel that he was losing, even if he didn't understand how. His jaw was tight. His hand rested near the edge of the table. Behind him, Dominic and 2 other men had gone very still, and Claire recognized that stillness. It was the stillness of men getting ready for violence, because that was how these meetings ended when the words broke down, not with a handshake, with guns. Laurent said something then in the dialect, and he smiled while he said it. The translator rendered it as a pleasant remark about the wine. It was not a remark about the wine. What Laurent had actually said, in the old coastal slang, was a phrase that meant something like, "There is a rat in your walls, and he has already sold the house." He was not insulting Adrian. He was warning him. He was telling Adrian Moretti, in a code he was certain the man couldn't understand, that someone inside the Moretti organization was betraying him, that the reason his deals kept failing wasn't bad luck or bad translators, it was treason, and it was a test. If Adrian understood the warning, he was still sharp, still worthy, still a partner worth having. If he didn't, he was already dead and just didn't know it yet. Adrian smiled back and raised his glass, responding to a compliment about the wine that had never been made. Laurent's face went cold. He set down his own glass. He glanced at his men. It was over. He was going to leave, and he was going to leave believing that Adrian Moretti was finished, and there would be no deal, and there would be no mercy. Claire stood in the corner with a bottle of wine in her hands and understood, with perfect clarity, that she had about 3 seconds to decide who she was going to be for the rest of her life. The invisible maid who kept her head down and stayed alive. Or the woman who finally spoke. She thought of Rosa. She thought of the driver nobody had seen in 3 years. She thought of her mother and her debt, and every single day she had spent making herself into nothing. And then Claire Bennett set down the bottle of wine, stepped forward into the center of that room full of the most dangerous men in the city, and did the one thing that a maid was never, ever supposed to do. She spoke. "He isn't talking about the wine," Claire said. Her voice came out clear and steady, in flawless French, in the exact coastal dialect Victor Laurent had been hiding behind all night. "He's asking if you're smart enough to know that someone at this table is going to betray you." The entire room stopped breathing. The translator's mouth fell open. Dominic's hand froze halfway to his jacket. Adrian Moretti turned in his chair very slowly, and for the first time in 2 years, he actually looked at the maid who had been serving his dinners, and his expression was one of complete, total disbelief. But it was Victor Laurent whose reaction mattered most. The cold European mask cracked. He stared at Claire as if a piece of the furniture had suddenly begun to speak, as if the wallpaper had reached out and grabbed his hand, and then slowly something shifted in his eyes. Interest, calculation, a sharp, sudden respect. "Say that again," Laurent said quietly in the dialect, watching her face. "In my mother's words, if you can." And Claire did. She repeated it back to him in the roughest, oldest form of the coastal slang, the kind only spoken by people who had grown up in those fishing towns, the kind no hired translator in America would ever know. She told him she understood exactly what he had been doing all night, that he had been testing Adrian, that he had been about to walk away, and that the warning he had buried in his words was the most important thing anyone had said in this room in a year. When she finished, the silence was so complete that Claire could hear her own heartbeat. Adrian Moretti had not moved. He was staring at her, and Claire could not read his face at all, could not tell if she had just saved her life or ended it. Victor Laurent leaned back in his chair, and then, slowly, the dangerous man began to laugh, a low, genuine, delighted laugh. "Adrian," Laurent said, switching to English, his eyes never leaving Claire. "I have been in this business for 30 years. I have met kings and killers and men who own entire countries. And in all that time, do you know how many people have ever understood what I was really saying?" He held up his hand and made a circle with his fingers. A 0. "Until tonight. Until her." He turned to Adrian fully now. "I came here believing you were finished. I came here to confirm it and then to leave you to the wolves." Laurent's voice was calm and certain. "But a man who has this working in his house is not finished. A man who has this is more dangerous than I imagined." He tilted his head toward Claire. "Where did you find her?" Adrian Moretti opened his mouth, and for the first time that Claire had ever witnessed, no words came out, because he had no idea where he had found her. He had never seen her at all. Claire stood in the center of the room, in her plain gray uniform, with every powerful man at that table now staring at her as if she had appeared out of thin air. Her hands were steady now. The fear had burned away and left something else behind, something she hadn't felt in years. She felt visible. She felt like a person. She felt for the first time since her mother got sick, like herself. And she understood in that moment that there was no going back. She had stepped out of the shadows in front of Victor Laurent and Adrian Moretti and Dominic and half the leadership of the most powerful criminal empire on the East Coast. They knew her face now. They knew her mind. She would never be invisible again. Which meant she was either about to become the most valuable person in that entire organization or the most dangerous loose end in it. Adrian finally found his voice. He didn't speak to Laurent. He didn't speak to his men. He turned in his chair and looked directly at the maid, and he spoke to her, and it was the first time in 2 years he had ever said a word to her that wasn't an order. "What is your name?" Adrian Moretti asked. Claire held his gaze. She thought about her mother. She thought about Rosa's warning. She thought about the driver and the debt and the 2 years she had spent as nothing at all. "Claire," she said. "My name is Claire Bennett, and I've understood every word spoken in this house since the day I arrived." The words landed in that room like a stone dropped into still water. Dominic's face went pale. Because Dominic had made phone calls in this house. Everyone had made phone calls in this house. Everyone had said things in front of the maid, the driver, the cook, the invisible people. Because it never once occurred to any of them that the invisible people might be listening. And now the woman who saw everything and heard everything and understood everything was standing in the light, and every single person in that empire suddenly had to reckon with the question of exactly how much she knew. Adrian Moretti looked at Claire Bennett for a long, long moment. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and did something that made every man in the room flinch. He walked around the table, past Victor Laurent, past his own stunned lieutenants, and he stopped directly in front of the maid who had just saved his empire. He was a full head taller than her. He was the most feared man in the city. And Claire did not step back. She did not lower her eyes. She stood exactly where she was and looked up at him without blinking. "You knew," Adrian said quietly, so only she could hear. "The Russian, 4 days ago, Kozlov. You knew what he really said, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. "Yes," Claire said. "You stood in that room and you watched me lose $400 million, and you knew and you said nothing." "Nobody asked me anything," Claire said. "Nobody in this house has asked me a single question in 2 years. They don't ask the furniture what it thinks." Something moved across Adrian Moretti's face then, something dangerous and unreadable, and Claire braced herself for whatever came next, because she genuinely did not know if this man was about to make her his greatest asset or his next disappearance. Behind him, Victor Laurent was still smiling, watching the whole thing unfold with the delight of a man who had come for an execution and stayed for a revelation. And Rosa, who had crept up to the doorway and was watching from the hall with her hand pressed over her mouth, closed her eyes and whispered a prayer for the girl who never could keep her head down. Adrian Moretti studied the maid who had spoken when everyone else was silent. And then he said the words that would change both of their lives forever. "From this moment," Adrian said, "you don't clean anything in this house ever again." Claire's breath caught. "You sit at this table," Adrian continued, his voice low and absolute. "You hear what I hear. You tell me what they're really saying. Every meeting, every deal, every word." He paused. "And in return, I make your debts disappear, and I make sure that the things you know about this house stay in this house. Do you understand what I'm offering you, Claire Bennett?" Claire understood perfectly. He was offering her a way out of poverty. He was offering her power and purpose and the chance to finally use the mind she had spent 2 years hiding. He was offering her everything she had ever wanted. And he was also making it very clear that she now knew too much to ever be allowed to simply walk away. The invisible maid had made herself seen. And the moment a person like Adrian Moretti saw you, you belonged to his world, whether you wanted to or not. Claire looked at the outstretched hand of the most dangerous man in the city, And somewhere in the back of her mind, she heard Rosa's voice, clear as a bell. "Do you know what happens to people in this house who know too much?" Claire took a breath, and she reached out and shook his hand. The handshake lasted 3 seconds, but it rewired everything. When Adrian Moretti let go of Claire's hand, the man everyone in that room feared turned his back on Victor Laurent, on Dominic, on all of them. And he said to the maid, "Sit. We're going to finish this deal, and you're going to tell me exactly what he means every time he opens his mouth." Claire sat. She sat at the table where, 10 minutes ago, she had been pouring wine, and she felt the eyes of every man in that room land on her like weight. The nervous translator who had been hired that morning quietly gathered her things and slipped out the door, and no one stopped her, and no one ever called her back. She was already gone. She had been replaced by a woman in a gray uniform who understood things the professionals never could. Victor Laurent watched all of this with open fascination. He leaned forward, folded his hands, and said something in the rough coastal dialect, and this time he was watching Claire, not Adrian. "He says," Claire translated smoothly, keeping her eyes on Laurent, "that he wants to see if this was luck. He's going to say something now that most people from his own country wouldn't understand. He wants to know if you really have what he thinks you have, or if I got lucky once." Adrian didn't blink. "Then answer him." Laurent spoke again, fast, low, burying 3 different idioms inside a single sentence, the kind of verbal trap that had ended 100 negotiations. Claire listened, and then she smiled, just slightly, and she answered him in his own mother's tongue, matching his speed, matching his slang, and she told him that a fish that swims too clever ends up in the net first, and that if he was trying to frighten Adrian Moretti with old fisherman's riddles, he should remember that the man across the table owned half the water those fish swam in. The room went silent, and then Victor Laurent threw back his head and laughed, a real laugh, delighted and loud, and he slapped his hand flat on the table. "Adrian," he said in English, wiping his eyes, "where did you find her?" He shook his head. "I have spent 30 years hiding my meaning inside my grandmother's language, and this girl in a maid's uniform just told me to watch my mouth, in my grandmother's language." He pointed a finger at Claire, but he was smiling. "I like her. God help me, I like her." Adrian said nothing. But Claire, sitting close to him now, saw something she had never seen on his face before. It wasn't warmth, it was calculation, sharp and fast. The look of a man who had just realized he was holding something worth more than the deal on the table. The negotiation that followed lasted 2 more hours, and Claire translated every second of it, not just the words, but the weight underneath them. When Laurent lowered his voice and pretended to make an offhand comment, Claire told Adrian it was actually the real offer, hidden to test whether Adrian was paying attention. When Laurent named a number and then immediately changed the subject, Claire told Adrian that the number was a bluff, that Laurent had flinched when he said it, that he would go lower if pushed. And Adrian pushed, and Laurent went lower. By the end of the night, the deal was not just saved. It was better than the deal Adrian had walked in hoping for. The shipping network was secured, the rumors of his decline would die by morning, and the wolves circling the empire would slink back into the dark for a while longer. When Victor Laurent finally stood to leave, he buttoned his coat, and then he did something no one expected. He walked over to Claire, took her hand, and kissed the back of it like she was royalty. "Whatever he's paying you," Laurent said quietly, "it isn't enough. And if he ever fails to see that, you come to Marseille. There is a place at my table for a mind like yours." He left. The door closed behind him and his men, and the room let out a breath it had been holding all night. Adrian turned to Claire. "You understood every word Laurent said, in 3 languages, including a dialect that maybe 400 people alive still speak." "Closer to a few thousand," Claire said, "but yes." "And Kozlov, the Russian?" "The harbor Russian, yes." Adrian was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that Claire had known was coming from the moment she stood up. "What else have you heard in this house, Claire Bennett?" And there it was. Everyone in the room went still, because that was the real question, wasn't it? Not what languages did she speak, but what had she overheard, standing in corners, cleaning silver, refilling glasses, invisible, for 2 entire years. Every phone call, every private conversation, every secret spoken in front of the furniture. Claire chose her words with enormous care. "I've heard a great deal, Mr. Moretti," she said. "I've heard men in this house speak in 5 different languages, assuming no one understood them. I've heard things that would end careers and things that would end lives. But I want to be very clear about something." She looked around the table, meeting each set of eyes in turn, and finally settling back on Adrian. "I have never once repeated a single word of it to anyone, not because I was loyal. I owed you nothing, but because I understood that in this house, the difference between a person who keeps secrets and a person who becomes one is very small." Dominic, standing near the wall, made a small sound in his throat. Adrian's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "That," he said, "is the smartest thing anyone has said to me in a year." He stood. "Dominic, get her out of the servants' quarters, give her a room upstairs, and clear her debts, all of them, tonight." Dominic's face flickered with something Claire couldn't quite read. "Adrian, are you sure that's— Did I ask for your opinion?" "No." "Then do it." That was how, at 11 o'clock at night, after 2 years of sleeping in a narrow bed in a low-ceilinged room in the servants' wing, Claire Bennett was moved into a bedroom on the 3rd floor of Adrian Moretti's mansion that was larger than the entire apartment she had grown up in. She stood in the middle of it, still in her gray uniform, and she did not feel triumphant. She felt like a woman who had just walked willingly into the mouth of something enormous and had no idea yet whether it was going to swallow her. Rosa found her 20 minutes later. She slipped into the room, closed the door, and stood with her back against it, and for a long moment she just looked at Claire. "You did it," Rosa whispered. "You actually did it. I told you to keep your head down, and you did the exact opposite, and it worked." "It worked tonight," Claire said. "You're upstairs now. You're at his table. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand how many people have wanted a seat at that table and never got it?" Rosa crossed the room and took Claire's hands. "But listen to me. Listen. Being valuable to a man like Adrian Moretti is not the same as being safe. In some ways, it's the opposite. The maid nobody notices, nobody bothers to kill. The woman who sits at his right hand and knows all his secrets. Everyone in this world is going to want that woman gone, his enemies, and maybe, someday, his friends." Claire pulled her hands free gently. "I know, Rosa. Do you? I made my choice. I was tired of being nothing." She looked at the older woman. "I'd rather be dangerous than invisible. At least dangerous is a kind of alive." Rosa studied her for a long time. Then she sighed, and something in her softened, and she reached up and touched Claire's cheek the way a mother might. "God help you, girl. You've got more spine than sense. Just promise me one thing. Promise me you'll watch Dominic." Claire went still. "Dominic? Why Dominic?" "Because I've been in this house 30 years, and I've watched men come and go, and I know the look of a man who just watched his position get smaller." Rosa lowered her voice even further. "Before tonight, Dominic was the only person Adrian truly listened to. He was the ear, the advisor, the one who whispered in the boss's ear. And tonight, in front of everyone, he watched a maid take that seat. Men like Dominic don't forget things like that. They wait." The next morning, Claire's new life began in earnest. Over the following weeks, she sat in on meeting after meeting, and each time, the story was the same. Adrian would bring in some partner, some rival, some potential ally, and they would talk, and Claire would listen, and she would hear the thing underneath the thing. She saved a deal with a Colombian shipping magnate by catching a single mistranslated verb that would have implied a threat where none existed. She saved another with a group of Eastern European partners by recognizing that their apparent aggression was actually a cultural formality, a ritual of respect that a lesser interpreter would have escalated into violence. And slowly, inevitably, the whispers began. At first, they were just rumors in the wider organization. There was talk of a woman, a mysterious new advisor Adrian Moretti had brought in, someone who could hear what no one else could hear. No one knew her name. No one knew her face, but everyone knew that suddenly, deals that should have failed were succeeding, and negotiations that should have ended in blood were ending in signatures. And the great Adrian Moretti, who everyone had written off as fading, was somehow sharper and more dangerous than he had ever been. His enemies took notice. Claire could feel the shift even from inside the mansion. The meetings got tenser, the partners got more careful, and more than once she caught someone across a table staring at her, trying to figure out who she was, why a maid was sitting at Adrian Moretti's right hand. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after the night with Laurent, Adrian called Claire into his study alone. It was the first time they had been truly alone together, and Claire felt the strangeness of it as she stepped inside and he closed the door. "Sit," he said. She sat. Adrian didn't sit. He stood by the window with his back to her for a long moment, and then he said, "Someone is stealing from me." Claire waited. "For about 8 months now," Adrian continued, "money has been disappearing. Small amounts at first, then larger. Deals that should have brought in certain numbers bring in less. Shipments that should have arrived full arrive short. At first I thought it was incompetence, then bad luck. Then I thought it was my enemies." He turned around. "But Laurent's warning, that night, he said there was a rat in my walls who had already sold the house. He knew something. And a man like Laurent doesn't say things like that unless he has a reason." Claire's mind was already moving. "You think there's a traitor inside your organization? I think Laurent was warning me that everyone else already knows it, and I'm the last one to find out." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Do you know what that means, Claire? It means someone close to me has been feeding information to my enemies for months, and every partner I sit down with knows it, and they've been looking at me like a dead man walking because they assume the person who runs my house can't even see the knife at his own back. That's why the deals were failing," Claire said slowly. "It wasn't just the translators. Your partners thought you were already compromised. They didn't want to sign with a man who was about to be destroyed from the inside." "Exactly." Adrian crossed the room and sat down across from her, close, his eyes locked on hers. "You hear things. You hear everything. That's what you do. So I want you to do something for me. I want you to listen. Not for the deals, for the traitor. I want you to find the rat in my walls." Claire felt the enormity of what he was asking settle over her. He was asking her to hunt for a traitor inside an organization of dangerous men, any one of whom would kill her without hesitation if they realized what she was doing. He was asking her to make herself the single most dangerous person in the entire house. "You understand what you're asking," she said quietly. "I do. If I find this person and they find out I'm the one who found them, then you'll be in danger," Adrian said. "Yes, but you're already in danger, Claire. The moment you stood up in that room, you became a target. There's no version of this where you're safe. There's only the version where you're valuable enough that I have every reason in the world to protect you, and the version where you're not." He leaned back. "I'm offering you the first one." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question that mattered. "Who do you trust?" Adrian almost laughed, a short, bitter sound. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? A month ago I would have told you, Dominic. I've known him 30 years. He's been at my side through everything." He shook his head slowly. "But I've learned something recently. The people we trust the most are exactly the people best positioned to destroy us, because we stop watching them." The words hung in the air between them, and Claire thought of Rosa. "Watch Dominic." "I'm not accusing anyone," Adrian said, reading her face. "Dominic has bled for this family, but I've reached a point where I can't afford to assume anyone is innocent, including him, including anyone." He fixed her with a hard look. "You're the only person in this house I know for certain isn't the traitor." "How do you know that?" "Because the money started disappearing 8 months ago," Adrian said simply. "And 8 months ago, you were still cleaning my floors, and I didn't even know your name. Whoever's doing this has been doing it since before you mattered to anyone. It can't be you." He stood. "Which makes you the only clean pair of ears I have. So use them." And so Claire's role in the house changed again, from advisor to something far more dangerous. On the surface, nothing looked different. She sat in meetings, she translated, she smiled and refilled glasses and played, when it was useful, the harmless, invisible girl she had been for so long. But underneath, she was hunting. She listened to everything. She noticed who made phone calls in which rooms, who lowered their voices when certain names came up, who seemed too relaxed when they should have been nervous and too nervous when they should have been calm. She started keeping track of which men had been present for which deals, cross-referencing the failures against the faces in the room, and slowly a pattern began to emerge, and it terrified her, Because every single deal that had failed, every shipment that had come up short, every negotiation that had leaked to Adrian's enemies had one thing in common. One man had been present for all of them. Dominic. Claire didn't want to believe it. She told herself it wasn't proof. Dominic was Adrian's second in command. Of course, he was present for everything. That was his job. His presence at all the failures didn't mean he caused them. She forced herself to keep looking, to find another explanation, to consider anyone else. But the more she listened, the worse it got. 3 weeks into her secret search, she was in the hallway outside the study late one night, and she heard Dominic's voice through a door that had been left slightly ajar. He was on the phone. And he was speaking in a low, careful voice, in a language he clearly did not expect anyone in the house to understand. He was speaking in Portuguese, and Claire spoke Portuguese. She pressed herself against the wall and she listened, and her blood turned to ice. Because Dominic was giving someone the details of Adrian's next major shipment. The route, the timing, the value, everything. He was selling it right there to a voice on the other end of the line, and he was doing it in a language he was certain no one in Adrian Moretti's house would ever understand. He was the rat. Rosa had been right. Laurent had been right. Dominic, who had bled for the family for 30 years, who was the one man Adrian had trusted above all others, was the traitor. Claire's heart was slamming so hard she was certain he could hear it. She stayed frozen against the wall, barely breathing, as Dominic finished the call. She heard him say, in Portuguese, one last chilling sentence before he hung up. Don't worry about the girl, the new one, the translator. She's nothing. Adrian's got some idea she's clever, but she's just a maid who got lucky. I'll deal with her when the time comes. The line went dead. Claire slid backward down the hallway, silent as breath, and made it to the corner just as Dominic opened the study door and stepped out. She pressed herself into the shadows and watched him walk past, calm and unhurried, a man who had just betrayed the person he was closest to in the world and felt absolutely nothing about it. She waited until she heard his footsteps fade down the stairs. Then she sank down against the wall and sat on the cold floor in the dark, shaking. She had found the rat, and the rat had already promised to deal with her when the time came. Now she had to decide what to do with what she knew, and she understood, sitting there in the dark, that this was the most dangerous moment of her entire life. If she told Adrian, and she was wrong about even one detail, Dominic would find out she had been spying, and he would kill her. And if she was right, if Dominic really was the traitor, then the moment she exposed him, she would be making a lifelong enemy of a man who had spent 30 years learning how to make people disappear. Either way, the invisible maid, who had finally made herself seen, had just overheard the one secret in that house that could get her killed the fastest. Claire did not sleep that night. She lay in her bed on the 3rd floor, and she thought it through from every angle, the way she thought through everything, carefully, coldly, completely. And by the time the sun came up, she had made a decision. She would not go to Adrian with a story. A story could be denied. A story could be twisted. A story could get her killed before it got Dominic killed. She would go to him with proof. Over the next several days, Claire became a different kind of hunter. She stopped listening passively and started building a case. She noted the exact date and time she had overheard the Portuguese call. She began paying attention to Dominic's phone, memorizing when he made calls and how long they lasted, and most importantly, she began to think about the shipment he had sold, the one whose details he had given away over the phone. Because if she was right, that shipment was going to be hit. Adrian's enemies were going to intercept it, using the information Dominic had handed them. And if Claire could predict that, if she could warn Adrian before it happened and then be proven right, she wouldn't need to explain anything. The shipment would explain everything for her. She went to Adrian 4 days later. She didn't accuse Dominic. She was far too smart for that. Instead, she said, "The shipment coming in on the 14th, the one going to the North Harbor, I think it's going to be hit." Adrian looked up sharply. "Why?" "I can't tell you exactly why yet," Claire said carefully, "but I've been listening, like you asked, and I have a very strong feeling that our enemies know about that shipment. They know the route, the timing, the value, all of it. Someone told them." She held his gaze. "I'm asking you to change it. Move it. Reroute it. Do something the traitor doesn't know about, and then watch what happens." Adrian studied her for a long, long moment. She could see him weighing it, wondering how much she knew, wondering why she wasn't just naming a name. And then, slowly, he seemed to understand that her caution was itself a kind of message. She wasn't naming the traitor because the traitor was someone he wouldn't want to believe. She was giving him a way to find out for himself. "All right," Adrian said quietly. "We'll test your feeling. I'll reroute the shipment. Only 3 people will know the new route. Me, you." He paused. "And Dominic." Claire's heart stopped. "Why Dominic?" "Because Dominic handles all the shipping logistics. It would look strange to cut him out." Adrian's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that a problem, Claire?" And there it was, the moment of truth. If she said yes, if she flinched, Adrian would know exactly who she suspected, and she would be committed. If she said no, she would be letting the traitor know the new route, and the test would prove nothing, because Dominic would simply sell the new route too. Claire made a decision in half a second. "No," she said calmly. "It's not a problem. Tell Dominic the new route. Tell him whatever you need to." She stood. "Just make sure that whatever route you tell Dominic is not the real one." Adrian went very still. Claire held his eyes. "Tell Dominic one route. Send the shipment on a different one. Tell no one about the real route except yourself, and then watch which route gets hit." She let the words land. "If nothing happens, I'm wrong, and I'll apologize, and you can go back to trusting everyone. But if the route you gave Dominic is the one that gets attacked, and the real route arrives safe—" She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Adrian Moretti stared at the woman standing in front of him, the maid he had never noticed, the advisor who had saved his empire, the hunter he had unleashed inside his own house. And Claire watched the terrible understanding dawn in his eyes, watched him realize exactly what she was telling him, exactly who she suspected, exactly what it would mean if she was right. "You're talking about Dominic," Adrian said, and his voice was barely a whisper. "You're telling me it's Dominic." "I'm telling you to run the test," Claire said. "I'm telling you not to take my word for anything. I'm a maid who got lucky, remember? That's what people say." A thin, humorless smile. "So don't trust me. Trust the shipment. Trust which route gets hit. And then you'll know for yourself." The silence in that study was the loudest thing Claire had ever heard. Adrian sat down slowly. He put his hands flat on the desk. And for a long, long moment, the most dangerous man in the city looked less like a crime boss and more like a man who had just been told that the brother he had trusted for 30 years might have been selling him out the whole time. "If you're wrong," Adrian said finally, "I will lose the one man I have left that I actually trust, and I will have learned that even you can be wrong." "And if I'm right," Claire said, "you'll have learned that the one man you trusted was the reason your empire was dying, and you'll have found out before it was too late." She moved toward the door. "That's the trade, Mr. Moretti. That's what listening costs. Sometimes it tells you things you'd give anything not to know." She reached the door, and Adrian's voice stopped her. "Claire." She turned. He was looking at her with an expression she had never seen on him before, something raw and exposed underneath all that cold control. "The call you overheard, the one you're not telling me about, what language was it in?" Claire hesitated. Then she decided he deserved that much. "Portuguese," she said quietly. He was speaking Portuguese, because he was certain that no one in this entire house could understand a word of it. She met his eyes. He was almost right. And she left him there, alone in his study, with the terrible knowledge she had just handed him, and the 4 days he would have to wait to find out if it was true. Those 4 days were the longest of Claire's life. She moved through the house like a ghost again, but this time it wasn't invisibility she was practicing. It was survival. Because Dominic was watching her now, she was sure of it. She caught him looking at her across rooms, that same calm, calculating look, the look of a man deciding when the time would come to deal with the girl who was nothing. He didn't know what she knew, but he knew Adrian had put her close, and men like Dominic didn't tolerate anyone close who they couldn't control. On the night of the 14th, Claire sat in her room and waited. She didn't sleep. She couldn't. Somewhere out in the city, a shipment was moving along a route that only Adrian truly knew, while a decoy moved along the route that Dominic had been given. And somewhere, Adrian's enemies were either lying in wait for a shipment that would never come, or they weren't. And Claire was wrong, and her life in that house was about to end. At 3 in the morning, there was a knock on her door. Claire's whole body went cold. She stood, crossed the room, and opened it. Adrian Moretti stood in the hallway. His face was gray, his eyes were hollow, and in that moment, before he said a single word, Claire knew. "The decoy route," Adrian said, his voice completely empty. "The one I gave Dominic. It was hit 40 minutes ago, 8 men, waiting exactly where they knew it would be." He swallowed. "The real shipment arrived at the North Harbor 20 minutes ago. Safe, untouched. Nobody knew it was coming." Claire didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Adrian leaned against the doorframe as if his legs had stopped working. 30 years, he said, to no one, to the empty hallway, to himself. 30 years, Claire. He carried my father's coffin. He held my hand when I buried my brother. He was the only person on this earth I would have said I trusted with my life. He looked up at her, and his eyes were wet, and Claire understood that she was seeing something almost no one alive had ever seen. Adrian Moretti, undone. And a maid figured out in 3 weeks what I couldn't see in 8 months. Claire stepped into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind her. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and she meant it. "I know what it costs to find out something like this. I'm sorry it was him." Adrian stared at her, and then, slowly, something in his face changed, hardened, closed over the grief like ice forming over water. The man who had been undone a moment ago was gone, and in his place was the crime boss again, cold and absolute and terrible. "Don't be sorry," Adrian said. "Be careful." He straightened up. "Because in about 6 hours, I'm going to have to look Dominic in the eye and pretend I don't know what he is. And you're going to have to help me. You're going to sit in a room with the man who promised to deal with you when the time came, and you're going to help me draw him out and find out who he's been selling to and how deep this goes." His jaw tightened, and he cannot know, not for a second, because a cornered rat is the most dangerous animal there is, and this one has had 30 years to learn exactly how I think. Claire felt the weight of it land on her chest, and it was almost too heavy to bear. She had found the traitor, and now, instead of the danger being over, it was only beginning. She was going to have to sit across from a man who wanted her dead day after day and pretend she didn't know his secret while she helped Adrian dismantle him from the inside. "How long?" she asked. "How long do we have to pretend?" "As long as it takes," Adrian said. "Days, maybe weeks, until I know everyone he's connected to, until I can cut out the whole cancer at once, instead of just one piece of it." He looked at her, and for the first time, there was something almost like respect and something almost like fear in his eyes. Fear for her, maybe, or fear of what she had become. "Can you do it, Claire? Can you sit across from a man who wants you dead and smile?" Claire thought about the 2 years she had spent smiling and pouring wine and pretending to be nothing while she understood every word. She thought about how good she had gotten at hiding what was really going on behind her eyes. "I've been doing exactly that since the day I got here," she said. "The only thing that's changed is now I know his secret instead of mine." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded once and turned and walked away down the darkened hall, a man carrying the weight of a betrayal 30 years in the making, going to spend the next few hours figuring out how to destroy the closest thing he'd ever had to a brother. And Claire stood alone in the doorway of her room on the 3rd floor, in a house full of dangerous men, having just proven herself right about the deadliest one of all, and understood that she had crossed a line she could never step back over. She had wanted to be more than invisible. Now she was the woman who knew where the bodies were going to be buried, and one of them, if she made a single mistake in the days to come, was going to be her own. The next morning, Claire had to learn how to lie with her whole body. She walked into the breakfast room at 8 o'clock, and Dominic was already there, drinking his coffee, reading something on his phone, looking for all the world like a man without a single sin on his conscience. And Claire had to walk past him and pour herself coffee and say good morning and mean nothing by it, while every nerve in her body screamed that the man 3 feet away from her had promised to kill her when the time came. "Morning, Claire," Dominic said, not looking up. "Morning. Big day. Adrian's got the Genovese people coming in this afternoon. He'll want you sharp." Now he did look up, and his eyes were flat and pleasant and completely dead. "You feeling sharp?" "Always. Claire said, and she smiled, and she carried her coffee to the far end of the table, and she sat down, and she did not let her hand shake even a little. That was the game now. That was the whole game. Adrian had been clear. They could not move against Dominic yet, not until they knew everyone he was connected to, every buyer, every leak, the full shape of the thing. If they took him now, they'd cut off one head and leave the body alive, and the body would come for them both. So they had to wait. They had to smile. They had to let the traitor keep breathing while they mapped every inch of his betrayal. And Claire had to do it while sitting closer to Dominic than anyone else in the house, because that was where the information was. Over the next several days, Claire became two people. There was the Claire that everyone saw, calm and useful and a little quiet, the translator who sat at Adrian's side and made the deals work. And there was the other Claire, the one who never stopped watching, who cataloged every call Dominic made and every room he made it in, who noticed when he stepped outside to smoke and stayed too long, who memorized the rhythm of his lies. She learned things. She learned that Dominic was careful, far more careful than she'd first realized. The Portuguese call had not been a slip. It had been a habit, a system. He conducted all his real business in languages he was certain no one around him spoke, rotating between them. Portuguese one day, a Sicilian dialect the next, sometimes a clipped, coded Greek. He had built his entire betrayal on the same foundation Claire had built her survival on. The assumption that no one was listening. The assumption that no one could understand. The difference was, now someone could. On the third day, Claire overheard the name. She was in the hallway outside the wine cellar, ostensibly checking an inventory list, when Dominic came down the back stairs with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking that clipped Sicilian dialect he thought was safe. And he said a name, Salvatore Ricci. He said it twice, with the particular weight men use for someone who matters. And then he said, in Sicilian, Ricci wants the girl gone before the next shipment. He thinks she's the reason Moretti's been slipping through our fingers. I told him I'd handle it. Claire stood absolutely still, staring at the inventory list, seeing nothing. Salvatore Ricci. She knew that name. Everyone in Adrian's world knew that name. Ricci was not a small player, not some rival buying leaked shipment routes on the side. Salvatore Ricci ran one of the only criminal organizations on the East Coast large enough to actually challenge the Morettis. He and Adrian had been circling each other for a decade, two apex predators who had never quite gone to war because neither was certain he would win. And Dominic wasn't just selling to him. Dominic was working for him. This wasn't a greedy lieutenant skimming money. This was a coordinated campaign. Ricci had turned Adrian's most trusted man, and together they had spent months bleeding the Moretti empire from the inside, weakening it, isolating it, setting it up. The failing deals, the short shipments, the rumors of Adrian's decline, none of it was luck. It was a war Adrian didn't even know he was fighting, being waged by the one person he'd never thought to watch. And the plan, apparently, called for Claire to die before the next shipment. She made it back to her room before her legs gave out. She sat on the edge of the bed and forced herself to breathe, in and out, slow and even, the way she'd taught herself to do in the worst days after her mother died, when the panic came like a wave and threatened to pull her under. She had a name now, Salvatore Ricci. She had the shape of the thing, the real shape, a rival empire and a turned lieutenant and a plan that ended with her dead. This was what Adrian had asked her to find. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt like a woman who had just read her own execution order. She found Adrian an hour later, alone in his study, and she closed the door, and she told him everything. The name, the Sicilian call, Ricci wants the girl gone before the next shipment. She watched his face as she said it, and she watched the last piece of hope he'd been holding on to quietly die. Ricci, Adrian said. He said it the way a man says the name of an old disease he'd hoped was cured. Of course it's Ricci. Who else has the reach? Who else has the patience? He was quiet for a moment. 10 years I've kept the peace with that man. 10 years of not going to war because we both knew what a war would cost. And the whole time he was digging a tunnel under my house. Using Dominic, Claire said. Using Dominic. Adrian's hands closed slowly into fists on the desk. You understand what this means, Claire. This isn't a rat in the walls anymore. This is an invasion. Ricci hasn't been stealing from me. He's been dismantling me, piece by piece, deal by deal, so that when he finally moves against me openly, I'll already be too weak to fight back. He looked up, and his eyes were hard and clear. And you. He wants you dead, because you're the thing that's been ruining his timeline. Every deal you save, every trap you spot, you push his war further away. To Ricci, you're not a translator. You're the wall he can't get through. Claire's mouth was dry. So he's going to keep trying to get through it. To get through me. Yes. How long do I have? I don't know, Adrian said. But we're out of time to wait and watch. Dominic's already been told to deal with you. That's not a plan anymore. That's a countdown. He stood and came around the desk, and he stood close to her, and his voice dropped. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop playing defense. We're going to use what you know before Ricci realizes you know it. How? Dominic thinks he's safe because he thinks no one understands his calls. That assumption is the only advantage we have, and the second we move against him, it's gone. So we don't move against him. A dangerous light came into Adrian's eyes. We move against Ricci, and we use Dominic to do it. We feed Dominic information, false information, and we let him carry it straight to Ricci like the good little rat he is. And Ricci, who trusts what Dominic tells him because Dominic has been reliable for months, will act on it. And when he does, he'll walk into whatever trap we built. Claire understood immediately, and the elegance of it and the danger of it hit her at the same time. You want to turn their own weapon against them. I want to make the tunnel collapse with Ricci inside it, Adrian said. But it only works if Dominic never suspects. Which means you, Claire, have to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. Sit close. Listen. Tell me everything he says to Ricci. And when the time comes, you're going to help me feed him the lie that ends this. It was a good plan. It was maybe the only plan. But Claire understood the price of it, and she said it out loud so there would be no illusions between them. You're asking me to stay next to a man who's been ordered to kill me, for as long as it takes, and to trust that you'll move against him before he moves against me. Adrian didn't look away. Yes. And if you're wrong about the timing, if he decides tonight is the night, then I'll have failed you, Adrian said quietly, and I don't intend to fail you, Claire. He held her gaze, and there was something underneath the words, something he wasn't saying, something that had been slowly building between them across all these weeks of meetings and secrets and shared danger. You saved my empire. You found the knife at my back. I'm not going to let it end up in yours. Claire looked at him for a long moment, and she made her choice, the same way she'd made every choice since the night she stood up in that dining room. Not because it was safe, because being nothing had never been safe either, and at least this way she got to decide. All right, she said, let's collapse the tunnel. The days that followed were the most dangerous Claire had ever lived. She sat across from Dominic at meals and meetings and pretended she didn't know he was counting down the days to her death. She smiled at him. She let him think she was exactly what he'd told Ricci she was, a maid who got lucky, a girl who was nothing, a problem he could handle whenever he chose. And all the while, she listened, and she carried every word he spoke back to Adrian, and together they began to build the lie. The lie was a shipment, a big one. The biggest of the year, supposedly, a massive movement of product coming in from South America, worth more than everything Ricci had managed to bleed out of the empire in 8 months combined. Adrian made sure Dominic learned about it the way Dominic learned about everything, through logistics, through the natural flow of his job. And Adrian made sure the details were specific and rich and utterly convincing. A date, a route, a harbor, a window of time when the shipment would be vulnerable, when Adrian's security would be thin, when arrival with good information could take the whole thing in one strike. It was bait. Every piece of it was bait. But it was bait built to look exactly like the kind of intelligence Dominic had been feeding Ricci for months, and Claire's job was to confirm that Dominic swallowed it. He swallowed it. 4 days after Adrian planted the lie, Claire heard Dominic on the phone in the Sicilian dialect, and she heard him give Salvatore Ricci the date, the route, the harbor, the window. Every false detail passed along as gospel. She heard Ricci's excitement, even through Dominic's side of the call, heard Dominic say, This is the one. This is the one that finishes Moretti. He won't recover from losing this. And she heard him laugh, low and satisfied, a man who thought he was about to complete a betrayal 30 years in the making. She brought it to Adrian that night. He took it, all of it. Ricci's going to hit the fake shipment on the 22nd at the South Harbor during the window you gave him. Adrian was very still. You're certain? I heard him say it, in Sicilian. He thinks it's the deal that destroys you. She paused. He's bringing his own people. Ricci's not sending soldiers for something this big. Dominic said Ricci wants to be there himself. He wants to watch it happen. And there it was, the twist that turned the whole thing. Salvatore Ricci, the patient predator who had spent 10 years never quite going to war, was going to break his own most important rule. He was going to come out of the shadows and be physically present at a robbery, because the prize was big enough and the certainty was total enough that he couldn't resist watching the Moretti empire finally fall. Except the shipment wasn't real, and the trap wasn't Adrian's to spring. It was Ricci's to walk into. He's going to be there, Adrian said slowly, and Claire watched the understanding move across his face, watched a decade of careful stalemate resolve into a single perfect opportunity. Ricci is going to be standing at the South Harbor on the 22nd, waiting for a shipment that doesn't exist, with enough of his own men around him that if something were to happen to him there, it would end the war before it started, Claire finished. It would end Ricci, Adrian said, and an organization like his, without Ricci, doesn't survive the year. His lieutenants would tear it apart fighting over what's left. The threat that's been circling my empire for 10 years, gone in one night, because a maid understood a phone call in Sicilian. He looked at her with something that was no longer just respect. It had moved past respect into something Claire didn't have a name for yet, something that scared her a little because of how much she found she didn't want it to stop. You didn't just find the rat, Claire. You handed me the man pulling the strings. But even as the plan came together, Claire felt the danger of it tightening around her own throat. Because there was one problem, one piece that didn't fit. And she made herself say it, even though she knew Adrian didn't want to hear it. Dominic's going to be there too, she said, at the harbor, with Ricci. If you spring the trap, if your people move on the 22nd, Dominic dies with the rest of them. Good, Adrian said flatly. Is it? Claire pressed. Adrian, think. The moment Dominic dies at that harbor, everyone in your organization knows the leak is closed, and they'll ask how you knew. They'll ask who found him. And the answer is a translator who's been sitting at your right hand for 3 months. If Ricci's people survive, if any of them get away, they'll know the same thing. And every single one of them will know exactly who to blame. She held his eyes. You collapse the tunnel with Dominic and Ricci inside it, and I become the most wanted woman on the East Coast. Every enemy you have will know that the reason their operation failed is a woman named Claire Bennett, who hears what no one else can hear. You won't have saved me. You'll have painted a target on my back the size of the city. Adrian was silent, because she was right, and he knew she was right, and it was the one flaw in an otherwise perfect plan. Then we make sure no one survives to talk, Adrian said finally. You can't guarantee that. You know you can't. Something always goes wrong. Someone always gets away. Claire's voice was steady, but her heart was pounding. I'm not telling you not to do it. Ricci has to be stopped, and this is the way to stop him. I'm telling you that when it's done, I can't stay here. Not as the woman everyone knows brought down Ricci. That woman doesn't get to live a quiet life. That woman gets hunted for the rest of it. And there it was, the thing that had been sitting underneath everything, the thing neither of them had said. Claire had wanted to be more than invisible, and she'd gotten her wish. But visibility, in this world, was not a gift. It was a death sentence, with a delay on it. Adrian stood there, and Claire watched something happen on his face that she had never seen before, not in all the weeks of meetings and secrets. She watched the crime boss, the strategist, the man who moved people like pieces on a board, run straight into a problem he couldn't solve by being ruthless. Because the ruthless solution was to use her, spring the trap, and let her deal with the consequences. And she watched him not want to do it. You'd have to disappear, he said quietly. After. New name, new city, new everything. I could make it happen. I could make you a ghost that even Ricci's people couldn't find. I know. You'd never be Claire Bennett again. I've barely been Claire Bennett for 2 years, she said. I've been the maid, the furniture, and then I was your translator. I'm not sure how much of Claire Bennett is even left. Something flickered in Adrian's eyes. There's enough of her left that I noticed, he said, and then he seemed almost surprised he'd said it, and he looked away. The words hung there between them, and Claire felt her breath catch, and for a moment neither of them spoke, because they had both just brushed up against the thing that had been growing quietly underneath all the danger and the strategy, the thing that made this so much more complicated than a trap and a traitor. She was the one who broke it. Adrian, the 22nd is in 6 days. Dominic has been ordered to kill me. What happens if he decides not to wait? What happens if he moves before the trap is ready? And right on cue, as if the universe had been listening, there was a knock at the study door. Both of them turned. Come, Adrian said, and his voice was ice again, the boss again, all the softness gone in an instant. The door opened. It was Rosa. And the moment Claire saw her face, she knew something was wrong. Rosa was pale, and her hands were twisting the edge of her apron, and she was looking at Claire, not Adrian. Rosa? Claire stood. What is it? There's a man, Rosa said, her voice shaking. At the service entrance. He came to the kitchen door 20 minutes ago asking questions. About you, Claire, not about the translator. About you. Your real name, your mother, where you grew up. Rosa's eyes were wide with fear. He knew things a stranger shouldn't know. He knew about your mother's hospital. He knew the name of the town your father took you to when you were a girl. And then he left, and before he left, he told me to give you a message. The room had gone completely still. What message? Adrian said, very quietly. Rosa looked at Claire and her voice broke. He said, tell her Mr. Ricci knows exactly who she is. Tell her the maid should have stayed a maid, and tell her she has until the 22nd to disappear, or the 22nd is the day we bury her. The silence that followed was absolute. Claire felt the floor tilt under her. The 22nd. The exact date of the trap. Ricci knew. Ricci knew who she was, knew her real name, knew about her mother and her childhood, and Ricci had chosen the 22nd, the same day as the fake shipment, to threaten her life, which meant one of two things, and both of them were catastrophic. Either it was a coincidence, and Ricci had picked the date of his own planned attack to also eliminate her, which meant the trap was still viable, but Claire was now a marked woman with her personal history exposed. Or it wasn't a coincidence at all. And Ricci knew about the trap, and the entire plan had already been discovered, which meant Dominic had figured out the shipment was fake, which meant everything Claire and Adrian had spent 6 days building was already dead, and the 22nd was no longer their trap for Ricci. It was Ricci's trap for them. Adrian's face had gone white. He understood the same thing Claire did, in the same instant. How? He breathed. How does he know your history? That information isn't in this house. That's not something Dominic could have learned from a phone call. And that was when the worst realization of all landed on Claire, cold and total. Because someone told him, she said slowly. Someone who knew my real story. Someone I trusted enough to tell. Her mind raced backward through 2 years, through every conversation, every confession, every late night in the servants' hallway when she'd let her guard down and talked about her mother, her father, the town overseas, the debt, the dreams she'd abandoned. She had told exactly one person in this entire house the truth about who she was. Slowly, Claire turned and looked at Rosa. And Rosa, who had gone even paler, who was still twisting her apron, who had known Claire's whole story, who had warned her about Dominic so specifically, so early, before Claire had any reason to suspect him, took a single step backward toward the door. Claire, Rosa whispered. Claire, no, it's not. You can't think. You knew about Dominic before I did? Claire said, and her voice was terribly calm. You told me to watch him the very first night. Before there was any reason to suspect anyone. How did you know, Rosa? How did you know to point me at Dominic? Rosa's mouth opened and closed. Her eyes darted to Adrian, then back to Claire. You pointed me at Dominic, Claire said, the pieces falling into place with sickening speed, because you needed me to find a traitor, just not the real one. You needed me looking at Dominic so I'd never look at you. That's not... How much is Richie paying you, Rosa? Adrian's voice cut across the room like a blade, and he was standing now, and the temperature in the room had dropped to nothing. 30 years. 30 years you worked for my father, and then for me, and you sold this girl's life to Salvatore Ricci. Rosa's face crumpled, and in that instant the mask fell, and Claire saw it, saw the truth she'd missed for 2 years, because she'd been so grateful to have one friend in a house full of enemies that she'd never once suspected the friend. They were going to kill my son, Rosa said, and now she was crying, but there was something underneath the tears that had gone hard and desperate. Ricci's people. My boy, he got into debt, the wrong kind, and Ricci found out I worked here, and he said if I gave him what he wanted, they'd let my son live. What was I supposed to do? Her voice rose, cracking. I told them small things at first. Then Dominic came into it, on Ricci's side, and it got bigger, and by the time you showed up, Claire, and started getting close to Adrian, they wanted to know everything about you. And I knew everything about you, because you told me, because you trusted me. The tears streamed down her face. So yes, I pointed you at Dominic to keep you busy, and I told Ricci your whole life. And I am so sorry, but they have my son. Claire couldn't breathe. 2 years. 2 years she had trusted this woman above everyone. Rosa had been the one person who saw her, the one person who treated her like a human being instead of furniture. And it had all been real, and all been a lie at the same time, a genuine kindness wrapped around a genuine betrayal, and Claire could not untangle which parts had been true. The message, Adrian said, and his voice was deadly quiet. Ricci didn't send a man to the door to threaten Claire. He sent you the words to say, "You're the messenger, Rosa. You've always been the messenger." Rosa didn't deny it. She just wept. And Claire, standing in the middle of a room where the ground had just fallen out from under everything she thought she knew, forced her mind to keep working, because that was the only thing that had ever kept her alive. If Rosa was the leak, if Rosa had been feeding Ricci information, then the question wasn't whether Ricci knew about the trap. The question was how much Rosa had known to tell him. "Rosa," Claire said, and her voice was shaking now, all the calm finally cracking. "The shipment. The one on the 22nd. Did you tell Ricci it was a trap? Do they know it's fake?" Rosa looked up, and through her tears, she said the words that changed everything. "I didn't know it was a trap," she whispered. "Nobody told me. I only knew what Dominic knew, and Dominic thinks it's real. So that's what I told Ricci, that it's real." She wiped her face. "As far as Ricci knows, the biggest shipment of the year is coming into the South Harbor on the 22nd, and it's real, and it's his for the taking." The trap was still alive, still. Ricci didn't know. Dominic didn't know. Rosa hadn't known enough to warn them. The threat against Claire's life was real, and the exposure of her history was real, and the betrayal was real. But the one thing that mattered most, the trap that could end Ricci forever, was still standing. Which meant Claire had 6 days. 6 days to survive a house where she now knew that even her closest friend had been selling her out. 6 days until the 22nd, when Salvatore Ricci would walk into a harbor expecting to destroy the Moretti Empire, and instead walk into the end of his own. 6 days in which Dominic was under orders to kill her, and Ricci knew her real name, and the only person she'd ever trusted in this house was standing in front of her, weeping, having betrayed her to save a son Claire had never even known existed. Claire looked at Rosa. She looked at the woman who had warned her and comforted her and lied to her for 2 years, and she felt something break inside her that she wasn't sure would ever fully heal. "Get her out of here," Adrian said to the 2 men who had appeared silently in the doorway. "Don't hurt her. Not yet. Her son is leverage now, and leverage has uses." He looked at Rosa with an expression that was almost pity and almost contempt. "You should have come to me, Rosa. 30 years, and you never once thought I might have helped you with your boy. You went to Ricci instead. That was the mistake, not the betrayal. The betrayal I understand, but you trusted the wrong monster." They led Rosa out. She didn't fight. At the door, she turned back one last time and she looked at Claire and she said, "I really did care about you. That part was real. I hope someday you believe that." And then she was gone. The study door closed, and Claire and Adrian were alone, and the silence between them was full of everything that had just been broken. Claire's legs finally gave out. She sat down hard in the chair, and she put her face in her hands, and for the first time since the night she'd stood up in that dining room, she felt the full weight of what she'd walked into. She'd wanted to matter. She'd wanted to be seen. And now she mattered so much that a crime lord knew her mother's name, and she was so seen that the one friend she'd had was a knife in the dark, and the only person left standing beside her was a man whose entire world was betrayal and blood. She felt Adrian's hand on her shoulder. It was the first time he had ever touched her without it being a handshake. She didn't look up. 6 days, she said into her hands, her voice muffled and raw. How am I supposed to survive 6 days in a house where I can't trust anyone? Adrian was quiet for a moment, and then he said something she didn't expect. You can trust me. Claire lowered her hands and looked up at him, and she searched his face for the lie, the angle, the calculation, because everyone in her life had turned out to have one, and she couldn't find it. There was just Adrian Moretti, the most dangerous man in the city, looking down at her with an expression that had nothing cold in it at all. Why? She said. Why should I believe that? Rosa said she cared about me too, and she sold my life for parts. Why are you any different? Adrian crouched down so they were eye to eye. Because Rosa needed something from you, he said quietly. Your history, your secrets, your trust. She got close to you to take something. He held her gaze. I don't need anything from you, Claire. You already saved my empire. You already found my traitors. If I was using you, I'd have thrown you back to the wolves the moment you got dangerous. Instead, I'm sitting here trying to figure out how to keep you alive, and I can't tell you why, except that somewhere in the last 3 months, the thought of you not being in this house stopped being acceptable to me. Claire stared at him. That's not a boss talking, Adrian said. And I'm aware of how dangerous it is for me to feel that. In my world, the things you care about are just the weapons your enemies use against you. Ricci already figured that out. Why do you think he threatened you and not me? He knows. Somehow he already knows that hurting you is how you hurt me now. He stood back up, and the vulnerability closed away again, and the boss returned. So we survived the 6 days, together, and on the 22nd, we end Salvatore Ricci. And then I make you disappear so completely that no one who wants you dead will ever find you again. Claire looked up at him. This man she was never supposed to have spoken to. This monster the whole world feared, who was the only person left she could trust. And then what? She asked. I disappear, and you stay here, and we never see each other again? Adrian didn't answer right away. And in that silence, in the space where his answer should have been, Claire understood that the trap on the 22nd wasn't the only thing that could destroy them both, because she had just watched betrayal wear the face of a friend, and she was looking now at the one person she had left to trust in the whole world, and realizing that trusting him might be the most dangerous thing she had done yet. 6 days, a traitor in a cell, a rival walking toward a trap, a friend who'd sold her for love of her son, and a crime boss who had just admitted, in his own careful way, that the maid nobody ever saw had become the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. Claire stood up slowly, and she wiped her face, and she squared her shoulders the way she had the night she first stepped forward. Then let's survive 6 days, she said, and let's bury Salvatore Ricci. The first of the 6 days was the hardest, because Claire had to walk back into a house that had just revealed itself to be a nest of knives and act as if nothing had changed. Rosa was gone, locked in a room in the far wing with a guard on the door, her son's life now a chip in a game she no longer controlled. And Dominic was still free, still smiling, still counting down to a murder he'd promised Ricci he'd deliver, still completely unaware that the shipment he'd sold was a lie built to bury him. The whole house was a stage now, and Claire had to perform on it every waking hour, because a single wrong expression, a single moment of letting the fear show, could unravel everything. At breakfast, Dominic was reading his phone again, and he looked up when she came in, and he said, "You look tired, Claire." Didn't sleep well. No? He set down his coffee. Something on your mind? And Claire, who knew that this man had been ordered to kill her, who had spent the night learning that her closest friend had sold her, looked him dead in the eye and said, "The Genovese numbers didn't add up yesterday. I keep running them in my head. It's nothing." Dominic held her gaze a beat too long. Then he smiled. "That's what makes you good. You never let a thing go." He went back to his phone. "Adrian's lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have the work," Claire said. And she poured her coffee, and her hand did not shake. And she thought, "I know what you are, and you have no idea that I know. And that is the only thing keeping me alive." She got through it. She got through the whole first day. And when night came, Adrian found her in the third-floor hallway, and without a word he tilted his head toward his study, and she followed him in, and he closed the door. "We have a problem," he said. Claire's stomach dropped. "What?" "The 22nd. Adrian moved to his desk but didn't sit. "The trap only works if Richie shows up personally, the way Dominic said he would. But Richie threatening you through Rosa changes the math. He's feeling confident. Confident men get careless, but they also get impatient. If Richie decides to move on you before the 22nd, to prove a point, to rattle me, then Dominic acts early, and the whole timeline collapses." He looked at her. "We need to make sure Richie stays patient. We need to make sure he believes the 22nd is worth waiting for, which means we need to feed him one more thing, something that makes him absolutely certain the shipment is real and absolutely certain that waiting is worth it." "Through Dominic," Claire said. "Through Dominic, but it has to be perfect, because Dominic is the one piece of this that could still see through us. He's smart, Claire. 30 years of surviving in this world. If we push too hard, if the bait looks too good, he'll smell it." Adrian's jaw tightened. "So I need to know exactly how he thinks. And you're the one who's been listening to him. You're the one who knows the shape of his mind now. So tell me, what does Dominic need to hear to believe it completely?" Claire thought about it. She thought about every call she'd overheard, every lie Dominic had told, the careful, patient way he moved. And she understood something about him that she said out loud slowly, as it came together. "Dominic doesn't trust good news," she said. "He's suspicious of anything that comes too easily. Every time I've heard him talk to Richie, he's most convinced when he thinks he's discovered something he wasn't supposed to know." She looked up. "He doesn't believe what he's told. He believes what he catches. So we don't hand him the confirmation. We let him overhear it. We let him think he stole it." Adrian went still, and then a slow, cold smile spread across his face. "You want to stage a conversation. Let him catch us talking about the shipment when we don't know he's listening." "He does it to everyone else," Claire said. "He conducts his whole betrayal on the assumption that no one's listening to him. So let's use his own trick against him. Let's make him the one who overhears. Let's give him a moment where he thinks he's caught the real truth, and let that truth be exactly the lie we need him to carry to Richie." Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and there was something in his expression that went beyond strategy, something that was almost admiration and almost fear. "You think like they do," he said quietly. "You think like the most dangerous people I've ever known. And you spent 2 years mopping my floors." "I spent 2 years listening to the most dangerous people you've ever known," Claire said. "You learn things, whether you want to or not." They built it carefully over the next 2 days. On the third day, Adrian arranged for himself and Claire to have a conversation in the small library off the main hall, a room with thin walls and a hallway that Dominic used a dozen times a day. And Adrian made sure, through the natural rhythm of the house, that Dominic would be walking that hallway at exactly the right time. And when the moment came, when they heard Dominic's footsteps approaching, Claire and Adrian began to talk in lowered voices, the kind of voices people use when they think they're alone. They talked about the shipment. Adrian, sounding tense, sounding worried, said that the 22nd was the whole game, that everything was riding on it, that if it went wrong, the Empire wouldn't recover. Claire, playing her part, asked if the security was really as thin as the schedule suggested, and Adrian, in a voice heavy with false stress, admitted that yes, he'd stripped the South Harbor of nearly all its protection to move men to a different operation, that for a 6-hour window on the 22nd, the shipment would be almost completely exposed, and that it kept him up at night, and that if anyone ever found out how vulnerable it was, it would be a catastrophe. The footsteps in the hallway had stopped. Claire didn't look at the door. She kept her eyes on Adrian and kept her voice low and worried. and she felt Dominic on the other side of that wall, listening, drinking it in, catching the thing he thought he wasn't supposed to catch. And then the footsteps moved on. Adrian waited a full minute after they faded. Then he let out a breath. He heard it. He heard all of it, Claire said, and he thinks he stole it, which means he'll believe it completely. She felt sick and triumphant at the same time. He'll call Richie tonight. He called Richie that night. Claire was in position, in the hallway outside the wine cellar where Dominic liked to make his most private calls, and she heard him, speaking that clipped Sicilian, his voice tight with excitement. She heard him tell Richie that he'd confirmed it, that he'd overheard Moretti himself admit the South Harbor would be nearly undefended on the 22nd, that the security had been pulled, that this wasn't just intelligence anymore, this was a gift. She heard him say the words that meant the trap was locked. "It's real, Salvatore. I heard it from his own mouth when he didn't know I was there. 6 hours, no security, the biggest shipment of the year. If you don't take this, you'll never get another chance like it. Come yourself. You'll want to see Moretti's face when he realizes." And Richie, on the other end, agreed. Claire brought it to Adrian, and for the first time in days, something like hope entered the room. The trap was set. Richie had committed. He was coming personally on the 22nd to the South Harbor to steal a shipment that didn't exist, walking into the end of his own war. 3 days left. All they had to do was survive them. But survival, Claire was learning, was never simple in that house. Because on the 4th day, everything nearly came apart. It started with a phone call Adrian took in the morning, and Claire watched his face change as he listened, watched the color drain out of it, watched him grip the edge of the desk. When he hung up, he didn't speak for a long moment. "Adrian," Claire said. "What is it?" "Richie moved up his timeline," Adrian said slowly. "That was one of my people on the inside of his organization. Richie's not waiting for the 22nd anymore." He looked up, and his eyes were hard with something close to panic. "He's decided he doesn't want to risk it. He's decided that before he takes the shipment, he wants to eliminate the one variable that's been ruining his plans for months. He wants you dead first, Claire, tonight. He's sending men for you tonight, and then he'll take the shipment on the 22nd with you already out of the way." The floor seemed to drop out from under Claire's feet. "Tonight. He thinks killing you first makes the whole thing cleaner. No wild card, no woman who hears too much." Adrian was already moving, already thinking. "Dominic's supposed to let them in. That's the plan. Dominic opens a door tonight, Richie's men come in for you, and by the 22nd you're gone and the shipment's theirs." Claire's mind raced. "But if Richie's men come here tonight, if there's an attack on the house, then the trap on the 22nd falls apart," Adrian finished. "Because if I defend the house tonight, Richie knows I was ready for him, and he'll wonder what else I was ready for, and he'll never walk into that harbor. And if I don't defend the house—" He didn't finish. "Then I die tonight," Claire said quietly. They stood there, the two of them, staring at the impossible shape of it. To save the trap, Adrian would have to let Richie's men come for her. To save her, he'd have to fight them off and blow the trap. He couldn't do both. And Claire, who had spent her whole life thinking her way out of corners, looked at the corner she was in now and saw only one way through it, and it terrified her. "Let them come," she said. Adrian's head snapped up. "What?" "Let them come for me," Claire said, and her voice was shaking, but her mind was clear and cold and moving fast. "Don't defend the house, don't tip your hand. Let Richie believe his plan is working." She swallowed. "But make sure that when they come, I'm not where they think I am. Move me, hide me. Let them break in and find an empty room. Let Dominic open the door for killers who catch nothing but air. And here's the beautiful part." She stepped closer to him. "When they fail, when they come back to Richie empty-handed, what does Richie think? He thinks his information was bad. He thinks I got tipped off and ran. He thinks the wild card is spooked and scattered. And a spooked wild card on the run is no threat to a shipment robbery 3 days later. He'll write me off. He'll assume I've fled the city. And he'll go ahead with the 22nd more confident than ever, because he'll think the one person who could ruin it is gone." Adrian was staring at her. "You want to fake your own escape?" "I want Richie to believe he scared me off," Claire said. "It costs him nothing to believe it, and it makes him certain the 22nd is safe. And it keeps the trap alive, and it keeps me breathing." She held his eyes. "But it only works if Dominic and Ricci both believe it completely, which means you can't fight them off. You have to let them in, let them search, let them find me gone, and you have to be furious about it. You have to rage at Dominic for letting your prized translator slip through his fingers. You have to sell it, Adrian, the same way I've been selling my calm to Dominic every morning at breakfast. You have to be so convincing that even the man who's betraying you believes you got played." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and then he said very softly, "You're asking me to let armed men into my house to hunt for you, and to do nothing while they do it." "I'm asking you to trust that I've thought this through, the way you asked me to trust you." Claire's voice softened. "You said we survived the 6 days together. This is how we survived the 4th one." That night was the longest of Claire's life. Adrian hid her in a place no one knew about, a small room behind the wine cellar that had been sealed for years, a space that didn't appear on any plan of the house, that even Dominic didn't know existed, and Claire sat in the dark in that sealed room, alone, and she listened. At midnight, she heard them come. She heard the distant sounds of men entering the house, quiet and professional. She heard footsteps overhead, moving toward the 3rd floor, toward her bedroom, the room where they expected to find her sleeping. She heard, faintly, the sound of a door being opened, and then a pause, and then muffled voices, confused, angry, searching. They'd found her room empty, her bed unslept in, her things half gone, arranged to look like a woman who'd packed in a hurry and run. She heard them search. She heard them move through the house, room by room, closer and closer. And at one point she heard footsteps in the wine cellar itself, just on the other side of the sealed wall. So close she could hear a man breathing, and she pressed her hand over her own mouth and did not move and did not breathe and prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. The footsteps moved on, and then from somewhere above she heard Adrian. She heard him roaring. She heard the most feared man in the city absolutely erupt, his voice carrying through the whole house, demanding to know how this had happened, demanding to know who had tipped her off, screaming that his translator, his most valuable asset, was gone, vanished, warned somehow, and that heads were going to roll for it. And she heard him turn on Dominic. She heard him accuse Dominic directly, not of betrayal, but of incompetence, of failing to secure the house, of letting Ricci's men in only to have them find nothing. She heard him rage that Dominic had promised him security and delivered a fiasco. And it was perfect, because it did 2 things at once. It sold the lie to Ricci's men, who would report back that Moretti was genuinely furious, genuinely blindsided, that the translator had genuinely escaped. And it planted a seed of doubt between Dominic and Ricci, because now Dominic had failed, and failure in this world was the first crack in any alliance. Claire sat in the dark and listened to Adrian destroy his own composure to protect her, and she felt something in her chest she hadn't felt in years, something warm and terrifying and completely unwelcome given everything else that was happening. She was falling for him. She'd known it for a while, but sitting there in the dark, listening to him rage to keep her alive, she couldn't pretend anymore that it was just gratitude or just survival. The men left. Ricci's people withdrew, empty-handed, and Claire heard the house go quiet, and she waited and waited until finally, near 3 a.m, the sealed door opened, and Adrian was there, a candle in his hand, his face gray with exhaustion and something else. "They're gone," he said. "They bought it. Ricci's man just reported in. As far as Ricci knows, you got tipped off and ran. He thinks you fled the city." Claire came out of the dark room slowly, her legs stiff, her whole body shaking with the tension she'd been holding for hours. And when she stepped into the light, Adrian looked at her. And for a moment neither of them said anything, and the space between them was full of everything they hadn't said. "You were incredible," Claire said finally. "Up there. I could hear you. You made them believe it." "I wasn't acting as much as you'd think," Adrian said quietly. "The part where I couldn't stand the thought of them finding you, that part was real." He set down the candle. "When I heard them go up to your room, Claire, when I knew what they'd come to do, I had to hold myself in place. I had to stand there and let it happen. Do you have any idea how hard that was? I've spent my whole life solving problems by force, and tonight I had to stand still and trust a plan and pray they didn't find the wine cellar." He shook his head slowly. "I have never been more afraid in my life. Not of dying, of them finding you." Claire's breath caught. 3 days, Adrian said. 3 days until the 22nd. You have to stay hidden until then. As far as the world knows, Claire Bennett fled the city and disappeared. You're a ghost now, ahead of schedule. You can't be seen, not by anyone, not even the staff. He paused. Which means, for the next 3 days, the only person you'll see is me. And there it was. 3 days, hidden in the sealed dark of the house, with only Adrian Moretti for company, while a trap ticked toward its spring and a rival empire believed she'd already run. Those 3 days changed everything between them. Because when you take away the meetings and the deals and the roles they'd been playing, when you strip a crime boss and a hidden woman down to just 2 people sharing a small dark space while the world hunts one of them, what's left is just the truth of who they are. And Claire found over those 3 days that the man underneath the reputation was not what the world believed. He brought her food himself twice a day, slipping down to the sealed room when the house was quiet. And he stayed. He stayed longer each time, and they talked in low voices, the way they'd talked when they staged the conversation for Dominic, except now none of it was staged. He told her things he'd never told anyone. He told her about his brother, the one Rosa had mentioned, the one whose coffin Dominic had helped carry. He told her how his brother had died young and violent, and how Adrian had inherited an empire he'd never wanted, at an age when he was still barely a man, and how he'd had to become the monster the world feared because a softer man would have been eaten alive. He told her that every day for 20 years he'd worn the reputation like armor, and that somewhere along the way, the armor had become the man, until he wasn't sure anymore where the performance ended, and he began. "And then a maid stood up in my dining room," he said on the second night, and told a room full of killers that they were about to make a mistake. And she was right. And I looked at her, and I thought, there's a person in this house who isn't afraid of me. There's a person who sees past the armor. He looked at Claire in the dim light. "I hadn't felt seen in 20 years, Claire. Not until you." Claire, who had spent 2 years being invisible, who had wanted nothing more in the world than to be seen, understood exactly what he meant because it was the same thing she'd been starving for. 2 people, both of them wearing masks the world demanded of them, both of them so lonely inside those masks that they'd forgotten what it felt like to be known. And they'd found it impossibly in each other, in a sealed room in the dark, 3 days before a war. "I have to ask you something," Claire said on the 3rd night, the night before the 22nd. "And I need the truth. Ask, when this is over, when Ricci is gone and the trap is sprung and I disappear the way you said, when I'm a ghost with a new name in a new city." She made herself say it. "Is that really the plan? I vanish and you stay here and we never see each other again? Because I need to know, Adrian. I need to know if I'm saying goodbye tomorrow or if I'm saying something else." Adrian was quiet for a long, long time. "I've thought about nothing else for 3 days, he said finally. "The smart answer, the safe answer, is yes. You disappear. You get a real life, a clean life, far away from all of this. You deserve that. You deserve a world where no one knows your mother's name, where no one's ever ordered your death, where you're not the woman who hears too much. And if I care about you at all, the right thing to do is to give you that. To let you go, to never find you." He looked at her, and his voice dropped. "That's the smart answer." "And the other answer?" "The other answer is that I don't want to let you go," Adrian said. "The other answer is that in 3 days in a dark room, I've become more myself than I've been in 20 years, and I don't want to go back to being the armor. The other answer is selfish and dangerous, and it would put you at risk for the rest of your life, because being loved by a man like me is a death sentence with a long fuse. Ricci figured that out. So will the next one, and the one after that." He shook his head. "I can't ask you to live like that. I won't. So the smart answer has to win, even though I don't want it to." Claire looked at him in the dark. This man who was, she realized, trying to protect her from himself, trying to do the one selfless thing in a lifetime built on ruthlessness. And she felt her heart break and swell at the same time. "You know what I've learned," she said softly, "in all these years of listening? I've learned that people almost never say what they mean. They hide it, they code it, they bury the real thing under the safe thing. And it's my whole gift, my whole curse, that I can always hear the real thing underneath. She reached out, and she touched his hand, the first time she had ever reached for him. So I heard you just now, Adrian. I heard the smart answer, but I also heard the thing underneath it, and the thing underneath it doesn't want me to go. Adrian went completely still. Let's survive tomorrow first, Claire said quietly. Let's bury Ricci, and then let's stop giving each other the smart answer and start telling each other the truth. For a moment in that dark sealed room, on the last night before everything, Adrian Moretti looked at her with all his armor gone, just a man, just a person, seen all the way through. And whatever he was about to say, whatever answer he might finally have given, was interrupted by a sound that turned Claire's blood to ice. A knock on the sealed door. 3 slow knocks, and a voice on the other side, a voice that was not supposed to know this room existed. A voice that Claire had heard 1,000 times, giving orders, making calls in languages he thought no one understood. Dominic's voice. I know she's in there, Adrian, Dominic said through the door, calm and pleasant and absolutely deadly. I've known for 2 days. Did you really think you could hide her in this house and I wouldn't find her? 30 years I've lived here. I know every wall. A pause. Ricci thinks she ran, but I never believed it, so I decided to come see for myself before tomorrow, before the shipment. Another pause, and when he spoke again, his voice had gone cold. Open the door. Let's talk about the 22nd, because I've been thinking about that shipment, Adrian, and the more I think about it, the more I wonder why a man would strip his own security and then talk about it out loud in a room with thin walls, right when I happened to be walking by. Claire and Adrian stared at each other in the dark. Dominic knew, not just that she was hidden, he'd figured out the trap. He'd realized the overheard conversation had been staged, and he was standing on the other side of a door that only Adrian could open. 3 days of careful planning balanced on a knife's edge, the night before the 22nd, with the one man who could unravel all of it, waiting in the dark hallway, with the truth in his hands. Open the door, Dominic said again, softer now, more dangerous. Or I make a phone call and Ricci knows everything before sunrise. And tomorrow the only trap that springs is the one that closes on both of you. Adrian's hand moved slowly to the door, and Claire saw, in the candlelight, that his other hand had moved to his jacket, to whatever he kept hidden there, and she understood that the next 60 seconds would decide whether any of them lived to see the 22nd at all. Adrian's hand stopped on the door, and then, instead of opening it, he did something Claire didn't expect. He laughed. It was low and easy and completely relaxed, the laugh of a man who held every card, and Claire realized in an instant that whatever fear had flickered across his face a moment ago, he had already buried it, and now he was doing what he did best. He was performing. Come in then, Dominic, Adrian said, and he pulled the door open. You've earned it. 30 years, and you finally found the one room in this house I kept from you. Come in, let's talk about the 22nd. Dominic stepped into the candlelight with a gun already in his hand, held low but ready, and his eyes moved from Adrian to Claire and back again, and there was a thin, satisfied smile on his face. So it's true, he said. The maid who got lucky, hiding in a hole in the wall while the whole city thinks she ran. He shook his head. I told Ricci you were nothing, Claire. I was wrong. Nothing doesn't need to be hidden this carefully. You figured out the trap, Adrian said. It wasn't a question. He was buying time, and Claire knew it, and she made herself stay very still. I figured out the trap, Dominic agreed. The conversation in the library, too convenient. A man like you doesn't strip his own security and then discuss it where he can be overheard. You've never made a careless mistake in your life, Adrian. So the moment I heard it, I knew it was theater. He gestured slightly with the gun. The only question was who it was for, and the answer was me, which means you know. You know I've been with Ricci. You've known for a while. His smile faded. How long? Long enough, Adrian said, and you didn't kill me. I needed you, Adrian said simply. I needed you to carry the lie to Ricci. I needed Ricci to believe the shipment was real. You were the most useful thing I had, Dominic, right up until this moment. He spread his hands. So here we are. You've caught me. The trap's exposed. What now? You make your phone call, you tell Richie the truth, and then what? You think Richie rewards the man who almost let him walk into a slaughter? You think he trusts you after this? Adrian took a slow step forward. You've got a gun on me, Dominic, but you're the one in the worst spot in this room, because Richie already doesn't fully trust you after last night's failure, and now you have to explain how the whole thing was a trap you didn't catch until the last minute. You don't come out of this a hero, you come out of this a liability to both of us, a foe. Claire watched Dominic's face, and she saw it, the flicker of doubt, the calculation, and she understood what Adrian was doing. He was doing to Dominic exactly what Dominic had done to Adrian for months. He was working the crack in the alliance, widening it, making Dominic see that his position was far weaker than the gun in his hand suggested. He's right, Claire said quietly, and both men looked at her. Dominic, think it through. You've served Richie for how long? A year? And you've served Adrian for 30. And in one night, you've become useless to both of them. If you tell Richie the truth, you've just told him you almost got him killed and only saved him at the last second, and he'll wonder why you didn't catch it sooner and whether you're really his or still Adrian's. And if you don't tell Richie, if you let the trap spring tomorrow, then Richie dies and you've lost your buyer and your leverage and your future. She held his eyes. There's no move here that makes you safe. You've spent months betraying the one man who trusted you, and it's led you to a hole in the wall with a gun in your hand and no good options left. Dominic's jaw tightened. You talk a lot for someone who's about to die. Maybe, Claire said. But I'm right, and you know I'm right, and that's why you haven't fired yet. You came down here alone, Dominic. You didn't bring Richie's men. You didn't tell anyone, because part of you already knows that whatever you decide tonight, you have to decide it alone and live with it alone. She took a slow breath. You're not here to kill us. If you were, we'd already be dead. You're here because you don't know what to do, and you came looking for the answer in the one place you shouldn't have. The room was absolutely silent. Dominic stood frozen, the gun still in his hand, and Claire watched 30 years of loyalty and 1 year of betrayal war across his face, and she understood that everything, the trap, the 22nd, all of their lives, hung on what this one broken man decided in the next few seconds. And then Adrian said, very quietly, the thing that broke it open. Your son's debt, Adrian said. Dominic's head snapped up. What? That's why you went to Richie, isn't it? Same as Rosa. It's always the same story. Adrian's voice was soft now, almost gentle. I found out 3 days ago, when Rosa told me everything. Richie got to both of you the same way. He found the people I trusted, and he found what they were afraid of losing. With Rosa, it was her boy. And with you, he paused, it was money, your daughter, the treatments. I know about your daughter, Dominic. I've always known. I just never said anything because I thought you'd come to me if it got bad enough. His voice cracked, just slightly. You should have come to me. 30 years and you went to Richie instead of me. That's the part I can't forgive. Not the betrayal, the fact that you thought I'd say no. Claire watched the gun in Dominic's hand begin to shake. You don't know anything about my daughter, Dominic said, but his voice had gone rough. I know she's 7, Adrian said. I know she's been sick for 2 years. I know the treatments cost more than you make. And I know Richie found out. And I know he offered to pay for them if you gave him me. And I know you told yourself it was for her, that any father would do it. Adrian took another slow step, and now he was close enough to touch the gun if he wanted to. And he didn't. I would have paid for her treatment, Dominic, every cent, without you owing me anything. All you had to do was ask. You carried my brother's coffin. You held my hand at his grave. You think I'd let your little girl die over money? Dominic's face crumpled, and for a moment the ruthless lieutenant was gone, and there was just a father, exhausted and cornered and drowning, and Claire felt something twist in her chest, because she knew that feeling. She knew what it was to do something terrible because someone you loved was dying and you had no other way to save them. She'd become a criminal's maid for exactly that reason. She and Dominic and Rosa were all the same story, all of them people who'd sold pieces of their souls to save someone they couldn't bear to lose. It's too late now, Dominic whispered. Whatever you would have done, it's too late. I already did it. I already sold you. It's not too late, Adrian said. Not yet. Tomorrow it will be. But right now, tonight, you have one move left that saves your daughter and saves you. And it's not the gun. He held Dominic's eyes. Let the trap spring. Say nothing to Ricci. Let him walk into that harbor tomorrow, and when he's gone, when his organization falls apart, I'll pay for your daughter's treatment, all of it, and I'll never speak of any of this again. You come home, Dominic. You come back to where you belong. That's the offer. That's the only offer that ends with your little girl getting better and you getting to watch her grow up. The gun trembled violently in Dominic's hand. And if I say no, he whispered. Then you fire that gun, Adrian said quietly, and Ricci's men storm this house, and maybe you kill me, maybe you don't. But either way, the war comes early and messy, and your daughter's treatment dies with the deal, and you spend whatever's left of your life running from what you did. That's the other road. He held out his hand, palm up, the same gesture he'd made to Claire in the dining room months ago, the offer of a way back. Choose, Dominic, but choose like a father, not like Ricci's dog. For a long, agonizing moment, nobody moved, and then Dominic began to cry, silent and shaking, and the gun lowered inch by inch until it hung at his side, and Claire let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like an hour. I'm sorry, Dominic said, his voice breaking. God help me, Adrian, I'm so sorry. I didn't know how to ask. I didn't know how to say my little girl was dying and I couldn't stop it. So I let Ricci make me a monster, instead of letting you see me weak. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. 30 years, and I was more afraid of being weak in front of you than I was of betraying you. What kind of man does that make me? A father, Adrian said, and he reached out and took the gun gently from Dominic's hand. It makes you a father who made a terrible mistake, and tomorrow you get to start making it right. The 22nd came, and Salvatore Ricci, patient predator, the man who had spent 10 years never quite going to war, walked into the South Harbor at the appointed hour with 15 of his best men, expecting to find the biggest shipment of the year sitting nearly undefended, expecting to finally complete the slow murder of the Moretti Empire, expecting to stand there and watch Adrian Moretti's world collapse. He found no shipment. He found instead that the harbor was not undefended at all, that the 6-hour window of vulnerability had never existed, that the entire operation had been built out of nothing but a lie carried to him by a lieutenant he thought he owned. And by the time Salvatore Ricci understood that he had walked into the exact trap he thought he was springing, it was already far too late to walk back out. Claire was not there. Adrian had insisted, and for once she hadn't argued. She'd waited at the mansion, in the study, through the longest hours of her life, not knowing until it was over whether the plan had worked or whether Ricci had somehow slipped free and the war had come anyway. It was Adrian who came back and told her. He walked into the study near dawn, exhausted and gray, and he stood in the doorway and he said simply, "It's done. Ricci's finished. His organization is already tearing itself apart. By the end of the month, there won't be anything left of it." He leaned against the doorframe. The war that's been circling my empire for 10 years ended tonight in a harbor because a maid understood a phone call in Sicilian. Claire crossed the room and, for the first time, she put her arms around him and he held her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. In the weeks that followed, the empire didn't just recover. It became stronger than it had been in years. With Ricci gone and his organization collapsed, the Morettis absorbed what was left, and the rumors of Adrian's decline died completely, replaced by a new and far more dangerous kind of legend. Word spread through the underworld that Adrian Moretti had a weapon no one else possessed, a person who could hear what no one else could hear, who could sit in any room and understand any language and any lie, who had turned the great Salvatore Ricci's own scheme against him and buried him with it. They never learned her name. Adrian made certain of that. To the outside world, Claire Bennett had fled the city and vanished, and the woman who now sat at Adrian Moretti's right hand was a ghost with no history and no past, a shadow that his enemies feared and could never quite find. Dominic's daughter got her treatment. Adrian paid for all of it, quietly, the way he'd promised, and the little girl began to recover, and Dominic came back into the fold, not as the second in command he'd been, that trust could never fully return, but as a man who'd been given a second chance he knew he didn't deserve, and who spent every day afterward trying to earn it. And Rosa, whose son's debt had started all of it, was released, and Adrian settled the debt that Ricci had used against her, and he sent her away from the city to a quiet place, not as punishment and not quite as forgiveness, but as the closing of a wound that had never really been her fault, only her weakness. And Claire, who came to understand all of it, chose to let it be enough. But the biggest question, the one that had been left hanging in the dark of a sealed room the night before the 22nd, still remained. And one evening, weeks after it was all over, Adrian brought it back to her. "I made you an offer once," he said. They were alone in the study, the fire low, the house quiet. "The night we hid you. I told you the smart answer was to make you disappear. New name, new city, a clean life far away from all of this. I told you that letting you go was the only way to keep you safe. And you told me you could hear the thing underneath the smart answer." He looked at her. "So here it is, Claire. No more codes. No more hiding it under the safe thing. The smart answer is still the smart answer. Being with me is dangerous. It will always be dangerous. There will always be another Ricci, another enemy who figures out that the way to hurt me is to hurt you. If you stay, you're choosing a life where you'll never be completely safe. And you deserve safe. You deserve a world where no one knows your name." "I had a world where no one knew my name," Claire said quietly. "I had it for 2 years. I was invisible and I was safe, and I was so lonely I forgot I was a person." She stepped closer to him. "I don't want safe, Adrian. I've had safe. Safe is being furniture. Safe is watching a man lose $400 million and saying nothing because nobody asks the maid what she thinks." She reached up and touched his face. "I spent my whole life being overlooked. And then, one night I stood up in a room full of the most dangerous men in the city, and one of them finally saw me. Really saw me. Not the uniform, not the job. Me." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "You're the first person who ever did that. Why on earth would I disappear from the one place I was finally seen?" Adrian looked at her for a long moment, and Claire watched the last of the armor fall away, watched the crime boss and the monster and the legend all dissolve until there was just a man standing in front of a woman, holding something he'd been too afraid to want. "You understand what you're choosing," he said. "You understand what I am." "I understand exactly what you are," Claire said. "I understood it the first night, standing in the corner with a tray of wine. I've understood every word you've said and every word you didn't say since the day I got here. That's my whole gift, remember? I hear the truth underneath." She smiled, and there were tears in her eyes. "And the truth underneath you, Adrian Moretti, is a man who carried an empire he never wanted, who became a monster to survive, who paid for a traitor's dying daughter, who let armed men into his own house rather than let one woman come to harm. I hear all of it. I've always heard all of it, and I'm staying." And so she stayed. The woman who had once cleaned Adrian Moretti's floors became the woman who stood beside him when the whole world turned against him, and the empire that had nearly collapsed because no one could understand a threat became the most feared power on the East Coast, because at its center stood a man who was untouchable and a woman who heard everything. His enemies never found her. His partners never understood her. And in every room where billions of dollars and countless lives hung on a single word spoken in a single language, there she was, the quiet one in the corner, hearing not just what was said, but what was meant. They were never entirely safe. Adrian had told her the truth about that. There were other enemies, other schemes, other men who thought they could win, but none of them ever succeeded, because none of them ever understood that the real power in the Moretti Empire was not the man everyone feared. It was the woman everyone had once overlooked. Claire Bennett had spent 2 years being invisible, believing her value was measured by her uniform, her wages, her place at the bottom of a house full of dangerous men. She had let the whole world decide she was nothing. And then, one night, she had stepped forward and spoken when everyone else was silent and changed the course of an empire. Because the world had looked at Claire Bennett and seen a maid. Adrian Moretti had looked at her and seen a mind sharper than any weapon in his arsenal. And in the end, it was not the billionaire, not the killers, not the empires that decided the fate of that dangerous world. It was the quiet woman in the corner that everyone should have been listening to from the very beginning, and they never overlooked her again.